by Deborah J. Reeves. Please take your seat. We're going to begin right away. Chapter 122, Departures. Dr. Donovan stopped by to see Bertie and Alicia 3 times that day, but Bertie never noticed. Dr. D later told Michelle that the entire hospital could have fallen down around Bertie's ears, and Bertie would not have noticed. Michelle responded that Bertie was always so good with their kids that it did not surprise her. She continued, "It was like that movie, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, after Bertie met Bianca. Suddenly, someone had stolen the boy we had always loved and replaced him with a clone of Bianca in Bertie's shell. Do you think the spell has been broken for good?" Dr. D cocked his head to one side, as he often did when he was considering a thorny question, and after a few moments he responded, "It's hard to say, for sure, but I can tell you one thing. Our boy, the one we know, is back to be a father to that little girl, and he will never leave her. I saw a man fall in love today. It remains to be seen how he will handle Bianca. Knowing the stock from which Bertie arose, I surmise that not even hell itself could separate Bertie from Alicia's best interests now. Bianca will never regain that ground. Still, it's a sad story. Colette and Oscar will stabilize the mess, but it is still a mess, and who knows what the outcome will be. All I can think of is how lucky I am to have you, Michelle. So lucky." Michelle grinned. Her eyes twinkled, and she said, "And don't you forget it, buddy." Dr. D went off to work the next morning, after kissing the heads of each of his children and lingering for a long kiss from Michelle. His children squealed with disgust, and he laughed as Michelle grinned into his face. Today, at least, his heart was not as heavy as it had been on the way to work the previous day, but the day was young. Wearing the clothing that Bertie brought the morning after her ordeal, and thinking of how dowdy he preferred her to dress, Bianca walked out of the hospital when no one was looking. She was able to get into her pre-pregnancy clothing because, she congratulated herself, she had been dieting since the end of the 8th month. She left the maternity outfit that he had brought in the hospital room closet. "I never want to see another maternity dress as long as I live. It's my life. It's my body," she thought fiercely. Another nurse invaded her space, asking her to express milk from her breast for the baby if she was not going to feed the child herself. She had the certain realization that this was not what she wanted with her life. She knew that she was not cut out for mummyhood, school runs, puking babies, diapers, and small-town Canada. No way. She suddenly knew that she had to escape. She watched the nursing schedule of comings and goings for a couple of hours and said all the right things with a smile until she saw the looks of approval on the faces of the worried nurses. Then she saw a gap when no one was watching her. She got dressed, and she sucked in her stomach to do up the button on her skirt, wincing a little at the cesarean scar. She left the room, and she walked down the corridor to the elevator when there was no nurse at the desk. She rushed into the open elevator, and she went down to the first floor. When she got there, she rushed for the doors, and she drew in a deep breath of cold. She would never miss all this freshness one bit. She walked around the snowbanks at the edge of the parking lot, and she got into her Cadillac. She drew out the keys from her purse, inserted the key, and the engine started immediately. She drove to the airport, where she bought a ticket to Uruguay. Several hours later, She took a cab to her parents' house, and she settled into her room without talking to her startled parents. She called her old friend Damien de Monte, whose family had fled France a few years earlier after his father's criminal activities had been exposed. His whole family was happily settled in the South American country of Uruguay. Bianca had no trouble finding the phone number in the directory, and she asked Damien if he wanted to have dinner. He promptly suggested a convenient restaurant because he was delighted to meet up with his high school girlfriend once more. When the hospital called at dinner time that day to tell Bertie that Bianca was gone, they first tried the number at the apartment, and when they got no answer, they called the emergency number he had supplied. When Colette answered the phone, she passed it to Bertie, saying, "It's the hospital." Bertie snatched up the phone, and Oscar and Colette watched the color drain out of his face. He listened attentively, and then he politely thanked the caller, and he hung up the phone. "Bianca's gone, and they have no idea where she is," he said flatly. A moment later, Dr. D walked in the door. Colette took the little boys to the rumpus room to shield them from the confusion that was engulfing the adults. After some consultation, Oscar called Jean-Claude, who called his friend at the RCMP because Dr. D had concerns about suicide. Dr. D looked as devastated as Bertie felt, but he assured everyone that Alicia was being well cared for in the hospital nursery. No one, not even Bianca should she show up, would be allowed to remove her from the hospital until he himself had authorized it. "We need to put Alicia's welfare as our top priority," he asserted. Not long after that, Sergeant Richard called Jean-Claude to say that they had found the Cadillac at the airport and that Bianca had purchased a one-way ticket to Uruguay. The clerk at the ticket counter said that she had been alone and in high imperial spirits, with demands for special treatment and services. There was nothing more that the police could do. Everyone involved was perplexed. Bertie called Bianca's parents, who reported that they had not seen her. They congratulated him on the birth of their grandchild, but they seemed distant, distracted, even disinterested. Bianca's father promised to start an investment fund for the child's education. It was only then, when they asked what the child's name was. It was not long after Bertie's frantic call that Bianca arrived at their door in a cab. She demanded to be shown to her suite in the house. She was her old self, and no one wanted to ruffle those feathers. Neither did anyone think to call Bertie to inform him that his wife was safe and sound in Uruguay. That's the end of chapter 122. All rights to both the book and the presentation are reserved. We thank you for being here, and we ask that you consider giving us a like and a thumbs up, and we appreciate your kindness. I remain your friend, Deborah.